Welcome to Underpinned with Dr. Tim Myers and Russ Harris. Join us as we open God's Word and dive in for a better understanding of the Scriptures and how they should be applied to everyday living. Welcome back to Underpinned. Last time we started looking at the book of Amos. We focused mostly on chapter 5 where he talked about the day of the Lord, and we talked a little about that. The book of Amos is primarily all judgment
Yeah.
for the sins and directed mostly towards Israel, the northern kingdom, for their sins. There are lots and lots of parallels with what we see going on in society today and in our sometimes sadly in our churches as well as our personal lives. So we talked quite a bit about it. Um, Today, I want to wind up at the end of the book because, yes, the book is on judgment, but God also gives a message of hope at the end. There is restoration to come. And but before we jump into that, just as a little bit more leading up into it, we want to look at some of the particular judgments that God pronounced on the nation of Israel and some things he started to do and then did not.
Right. We
And
see that God doesn't want to judge,
right,
does not want to punish. He does that really as a last resort
yes,
when we don't pay attention.
yeah, when we really
Yeah.
won't repent.
Individually or as churches or nations. Yeah.
Yes. So we'll look starting back in in chapter
Yeah.
7, and Amos is relating some visions that God showed him. So he says, "This is what the sovereign Lord showed me. He was preparing swarms of locusts after the king's share had been harvested, and just as the late crops were coming up, when the locusts had stripped the land clean, I cried out, 'Sovereign Lord, forgive. How can Jacob survive? He is so small.' So the Lord relented. 'This will not happen,' the Lord said." So he was going to send locusts to take all the food away. Verse 4, this is what the sovereign Lord showed me. The sovereign Lord was calling for judgment by fire. It dried up the great deep and devoured the land. So that sounds to me like the sea and the land, everything was going to be burned. Then I cried out, "Sovereign Lord, I beg you, stop. How can Jacob survive? He is so small." So the Lord relented. This will not happen either. This
If
is, go
oh,
ahead.
if you don't
No,
mind,
go.
uh, I when I taught this, several weeks ago, the idea of the fire is more like a extreme drought.
Mm,
Even the waters like the Jordan
right.
and the Sea of Galilee and so forth is drying up
Uh-huh.
because of the severe drought. And this relates to Elijah. Now, he prayed that it would not rain for 3.5 years. Why? Is because of Baal worship. Baal was the god of the storm, the god of the rain, the god that brought the crops and brought prosperity. Well, God wanted to show them, no, Baal doesn't do that.
Yeah.
So, and this is what it's related to, not necessarily Elijah specifically,
Right.
but in a sense that, okay, if you think Baal's going to do this, well, I'll show you.
Right.
So,
This is, and again, that's probably why Amos is
mm-hmm,
relating him as the sovereign Lord, said that
right,
he is God, not any of these false gods.
yeah.
Um, so after those two, and the Lord said he would not do this either. Verse 7, this is what he showed me. The Lord was standing by a wall that had been built true to plumb, with a plumb line in his hand. And the Lord asked me, "What do you see, Amos?" "A plumb line," I replied. Then the Lord said, "Look, I'm setting a plumb line among my people Israel. I will spare them no longer.
Mm.
The high places of Isaac will be destroyed, and the sanctuaries of Israel will be ruined. With my sword I will rise against the house of Jeroboam."
Yeah, talking about Jeroboam the second.
Mhm.
So this, yeah, the current king
Right.
at that time.
So a plumb line, if a person doesn't know, is really a weighted string
Hmm.
held up above, and it stays straight to the ground, and so that will use the wall. If
Hmm.
it's straight or if it's crooked, you can use it for like a fence post if you're
Right.
setting a fence post or whatever. And so God says, "Look, I'm setting a plumb line among my people Israel." In other words, here's the measuring stick. This is where you're supposed to be, this line, where I'm going to judge all of your behavior against this. And the plumb line really is all of his laws and commands that he
Yeah.
set up back in Moses' time.
Uh-huh.
That's the plumb line. And he said, "I'm going to do this. I'm going to set this among my people." and I'm not going to bear with you. I'm not going to spare you anymore. Punishment's coming.
Mm-hmm.
And then in a paragraph in verse 9, the high places will be destroyed, sanctuaries be ruined, rise against the house of
Yeah.
Jeroboam the king. So judgment's coming. He's not going to do those other two things that are out in the locusts. But he is going to have judgment come.
Mm-hmm. And that judgment would be the
The
Assyrians.
Assyrian
The
kingdom.
Assyrians would take over the northern kingdom of Israel in 722 BC.
Yeah,
I mean, completely destroy them.
yeah.
And any survivors that were left were taken back to Nineveh.
Hmm.
So, the high places, let me just
Yeah.
comment on that. The high places that's where Baal worship took place.
Hmm.
So on, a hill
Yeah,
or
they would
whatever.
set up the worship
Uh-huh.
places up high,
Right.
being closer to God, I
Yeah,
suppose.
that's the concept.
Yeah,
Yeah. So,
yeah.
yeah.
And so he's going to destroy all of these false worship areas.
Well, I
And
probably can't find it, but oh yeah, I found it. Oh, good. But we're talking about the Assyrians coming in.
right.
This is back in chapter 4, verse 2.
Hmm.
It says, "The sovereign Lord has sworn by his holiness, the time will surely come when you will be taken away with hooks, and the last of you with fish hooks." Now, that's not a lot of, prophecy is kind of symbolic language. This is literal.
Hmm.
In other words, the Assyrians, when they captured people, they would actually put hooks in their noses, and of course they would be chained. And anyway, if they kind of really staggered behind and wouldn't keep up, they just jerked on that fish hook,
Yeah,
and to make them kind of get faster. So
yeah,
this was literal. So I thought I'd mention that. And then you will each go straight out through breaches in the wall.
yeah.
In other words, when the Assyrians, break through,
Hmm.
and you will be cast out toward Harmon, meaning Mount Harmon. In other words, you'll go back to Nineveh through that northern track,
Okay.
going back into Mesopotamia. So
Yeah. So he was telling them
yeah,
already. He was
yeah.
telling them, and he was telling them how it was going to happen too. Um, So then there's a little interlude, and then if you jump down to chapter 8, he gives us another vision
Mm-hmm.
that the Lord showed about the coming judgment. Um, verse 1, this is what the sovereign Lord showed me, a basket of ripe fruit. What do you see, Amos? He asked. A basket of ripe fruit, I answered. Then the Lord said to me, the time is ripe for my people Israel. I will spare them no longer.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah.
pretty simple imagery right there,
Right.
something nobody could mistake.
Yeah.
In that day, declares the sovereign Lord, the songs in the temple will turn to wailing, many, many bodies flung everywhere, silence. And then he goes into a whole lot of
Yeah.
judgment about it. Hear this, you who trample the needy and do away with the poor of the land. So he's talking more about the sins
Uh-huh.
that they were going through, and he had already called them out on these sins earlier
Mm-hmm.
in the book. Um, Verse 7, the Lord sworn by himself, the pride of Jacob, I'll never forget anything that they have done. And then, won't the land tremble? Isn't judgment going to happen? And then he says again, and it's tough, but down in verse 11 of chapter 8, the days are coming, declares the sovereign Lord, when I will send a famine through the land, not a famine for food, of
Yeah.
food or a thirst for water, but a famine of hearing the words of God.
Yeah.
People will stagger from sea to sea and wander from north to east, searching for the word of the Lord, but they will not find it.
Wow. I think that's one of the worst judgments there could be,
Yes,
and not being able to hear anything from God. And so you just you're ignorant. You're what?
purposeless, you're
Yeah,
aimless.
right. Yeah. No guidance at all.
Yeah.
No moral compass.
Hmm.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So,
And yet, I guess it's an appropriate punishment because
mhm.
that's how they were living.
Right.
They had the word of the Lord and they chose to completely ignore it
Right.
for all this time. And so God's probably now thinking or saying, well, you didn't want to hear from me, you didn't want to follow it, so now you're not going to hear it
Hmm. Yeah.
no more. Uh, and so he continues on and he describes the judgment. He gets to chapter 9 and there's a whole lot of, there's some different imagery in here and more about the judgment, and he
Mhm.
compares the Israelites to some of the enemies of the Israelites that he had cast down.
Uh-huh.
And, you know, for I will, verse 9 of chapter 9, for I'll
Mhm.
give the command, and I will shake the people of Israel among all the nations as grain is shaken in a sieve, and not a pebble will reach the ground. All the sinners among my people will die by the sword. All those who say disaster will not overtake or meet us. So he says all of this and all of this judgment, but then he says there will be a restoration
Mhm.
at some point at the end of this chapter. Verse 11, in that day I will restore David's fallen shelter. I will repair its broken walls and restore its ruins and will rebuild it as it used to be. David's fallen shelter. Some translations say tent instead of shelter there,
Mm.
which to me kind of shows the impermanence of anything human made. You know,
Right, right.
um, God, when God builds something, it's permanent, but anything that we do is impermanent and weak. And then notice in that verse
Oh, he
how,
could. Oh, oh man. I just thought I restored David's fallen shelter, its broken walls. Now it could actually literally be referring to Jerusalem,
sure.
but also could be referring to David's dynasty too.
hmm Oh, I think
You
it
know.
is.
Yeah.
I think it's
Yeah.
talking about the spiritual kingdom when
Uh-huh.
Jesus comes back.
Right.
Um, be, but notice in that first verse, after the fallen shelter, well, even before that, God says, I will restore David's
Right.
fallen shelter.
Right.
I will repair its broken walls. I will restore its ruins and rebuild it as it used to be. So it has to be done by God. Yes, He gives us jobs to do, but the power and the building has to come from God. Um, and yeah, in verse well, actually, I was going to say verses 9 and 10 before that, he talks about how Israel's going to be taken and
Hmm.
shaken as is grain through a sieve. So the grain falls through and the pebbles get weeded out. So they don't get in with the grain. That
Hmm.
he's using the pebbles as the sin or the sinners that are getting weeded out of the. That's, God is not going to rebuild anything or not going to build anything out of sin, out of sinfulness. So he has to take care of the sin problem before he uses us to build. When we have sin in our lives that gets in between us and fellowship with God, we're not as effective for him in whatever he's called us to do. The sin has to be taken care of, and then we can work powerfully with his power to serve him to do whatever it is he's called us to do. That has to happen. Um, but yeah, you were talking about it could be
Hmm.
later other nations, because in verse 12, so that they may possess the remnant of Edom and all the nations that bear my name, declares the Lord. I think, yeah,
Yeah.
Edom was one of their enemies and all of
Right.
that, but
Yeah.
talking about, they were Gentiles. He's talking about his
Right.
kingdom going out through the
Yeah.
Jews and the Gentiles. I believe it's talking about when, it's going to be, the restoration is not really going to happen until Jesus comes and establishes his kingdom and then makes the ultimate sacrifice and all of that. But then when he continues to describe this expansion, man, I mean, look at the the kind of illustrations and the phrases that he uses, the imagery that he uses to describe it. When the days are coming, declares the Lord, these are the kind of blessings God is going to pour on his kingdom. The days are coming when the reaper will be overtaken by the plowman, the planter by the one treading grapes. So in other words, there's a harvest happening, and before they can finish harvesting, it's so plentiful, it's the next season and the next
Right.
planting has already happened and they're
Right.
overlapping. That's how much God is going to bless his
Hmm.
kingdom during the restoration.
Yeah.
It's after the sin problem is taken care of and the kingdom is established. He's going to rebuild. He's going to build bigger, stronger, and he's going to pour out his blessings. And then he continues, there's the rebuild the ruined cities and live in them. Um, uh, let's see, they'll plant vineyards and drink their wine, they'll make gardens and eat their fruit. Um, the restoration, the blessings leading to all the nations mentioned in that other verse. I think that was even brought up in Acts 15 when the Church of Jerusalem was talking about including the Gentiles in um, Acts 15, 13, I think. I should have marked it, but I didn't, so I'll just find it the hard way. Um, yeah, over here. The whole assembly became silent as they listened to Barnabas and Paul telling about the signs and wonders God had done among the Gentiles through them. And when they finished, James spoke up. Brothers, listen to me. Simon has described to us how God first intervened to choose a people for his name from the Gentiles. The words of the prophets are in agreement with this, as it is written. After this, I will return and rebuild David's fallen tent. Its ruins I will rebuild, I will restore it, and so on. He's quoting these verses out of Amos to them. So James was using these verses in Amos to indicate to the church at Jerusalem that it did include the Gentiles
Yeah.
in the restoration of the kingdom, which I thought that was
However, we
interesting.
got to realize the millennial kingdom is not the church, though. So uh, in other words, there'll be Gentiles saved during the tribulation, that it's not part of the church
Oh,
as the bride of Christ. Yeah. So, but the Gentile nations will come to the Lord
right.
during the tribulation and then go into the kingdom. And Isaiah 2 really mentions this really well. It says, this is what Isaiah, son of Amos, saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. In the last days, the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established as the highest of the mountains, and it will be exalted among the hills, and all the nations will stream
Mm-hmm.
to it.
Yep.
Many peoples will come and say, come, let us go to the mountain of the Lord, to the temple of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, and so that we may walk in his paths. The law will go out from Zion, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He will judge between the nations and will settle disputes among many peoples. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, yeah, this is will be a time of real blessing. Um, the church the bride of Christ will be in the New Jerusalem during the millennium.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so we're distinct from the actual people that are saved during the tribulation. And Israel has a special place of blessing as well. So, but anyway, but yet Gentiles is a part of God's plan,
Right.
although the Jews didn't think so
Yeah,
at that time.
they definitely
Yeah,
did
and
not.
even Peter had a difficult time accepting it.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
much less all the Pharisees
right.
and the Jews
Yeah.
or the Jewish temple,
Hmm.
in the time of Jesus.
Yeah.
All right, any other thoughts on
No,
this before?
I just wanted to make sure that 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 there will be a great time of blessing when the Lord comes back and
Yeah.
sets up his kingdom. So,
All right. Well, thanks again for joining us this time, and we will look forward to seeing you with us next time on Underpinned.
thanks for joining us today on Underpinned. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with your friends. Join us again next week as we continue diving into God's Word. Until then, you can find us at www.underpinnedministry.com and at Underpinned Ministry on Facebook. For questions or comments, you can reach us at questions@underpinnedministry.com. And thanks again for listening.